Ladies, gentlemen, and channel surfers around the globe, welcome to a game called Click to 10. And honestly, I feel like it's just a symbolic game, kind of representing like how we go from like the beginning of life to like the end of death. You know what I mean? So I think when we're counting to 10, I'm just gonna go ahead and try and like explain the thought process behind this game, honestly, because this game is truly revolutionary. You know what I mean? So obviously we have 0, right? Boundless, holding nothing but infinite possibilities. You know what I mean? Right? Like yeah, sure, 0 is nothing. Like 0 has nothing, but like when you really think about it, 0 could really be anything. You slap a 0 onto a 1, and all of a sudden it's more than all the single digits. You know what I mean? Or you slap a 0 onto 20, and suddenly it's bigger than all the teens, right? So I mean, it's just, I'm gonna say 2, but you get what I'm trying to say, right? Like I feel as though 0 just represents a whole lot, you know. And 0, honestly, if you think about it, like how 0 starts the count, kinda, you know what I mean? And then it can also end the count, right? It's just like it's representative of the oval, right? Because it comes full circle, right? And I'll talk about that more whenever we get to 10. But on to the next one, obviously, 1, right? Don't look at that. Don't look at that. So 1 is where it truly begins. You know, you take your first steps, you have your first kiss, you find your first love, you eat your first bite of your favorite food. You know what I mean? Like it all starts at 1, the first. You know, numero uno, right? As the Spanish people would say. Duolingo's been helping out. You know what I mean? But like I just, you know, like what more is there to say other than like it's the beginning, right? It's symbolic. It's a symbolic meaning of purpose, you know, finding that purpose, you know. And in order to find that purpose, you always have to take that first step into something that is very uncomfortable and that you may not just know. You know what I mean? Like when we think of 1, quick, let's do a little exercise. When you think of 1, what is the first thing that comes to your mind? Boom, right? It's winning, you know, first place. You know what I mean? Being on the top is number 1, right? You start from the beginning, right? It's just, you think of a lot of things, and it just all concise in the number 1. And I think that's very symbolic, and is a really good representation of what it truly means to begin anew. You know what I mean? Because from something is born from nothing. 1 is at something, 0 is at nothing. But of course, both of them hold endless possibilities. You know, they always come first, both of them simultaneously, and I think that's just very indicative of life. You know what I mean? Like there can be many things that come first in your life simultaneously, and it's just about how you manage that. And I think that really comes into fruition, and you can really see that better with the number 2, right? So with the number 2, clearly, like I said, Duolingo, right? You know what I mean? There's a lot of representation within the number 2. You know, duo, partner is normally like a 2-person thing. You know what I mean? Like you can have multiple partners, but like when you think of partner, you think of that one person, right, with yourself, which forms 2, right? So now you have 2 important things, yourself and that partner, right? And I think that partner could really be a representation of anything. To me, when I think of partner, I think of life. You know what I mean? What is a better partner than life? And you only get one life, but it's your life, and it's also just the experience of life, which is like a duality, right? Life is always about duality, right? You always hear about the duality of man. You hear about the duality of somebody's circumstances. You know what I mean? You always think of both sides of the story. You know what I mean? So it's just like when you think of 2, you think of 1, and then when you think of 1, you think of 0, and it all just like kind of comes together. You know what I mean? But honestly, that's kind of where like the fluidity of the numbers kind of end, and we begin with something more, right? With 3. Clearly, right? So with 3, like you just have to really think about it, right? Like look at how curvy the features of 3 are, right? Not to get a little, you know, into that ballpark. You know, if you wanna, you know, 3, I'm not gonna judge it, right? I might even respect it. But when you think of 3, like what's the first thing that comes to mind? Usefulness, right? Because you think of 3 and you think, wow, okay, I've been able to use 3 for a lot of things. You turn it sideways, it's a W. You turn it the other way, it's an M. If you use it the same way that it is right now, and you add a couple of characters off your keyboard, you can make faces with it, right? 3 is so useful, and I think that it's just that like you don't really appreciate it enough, you know? I never hear anybody saying, oh yeah, 3 is my favorite number. You know, it's always 7, right? And we'll get to that later on, right? We'll get to that later on. But I think that we should really start appreciating 3 for what it really is, and that's just kind of like the glue that holds the separating numbers together. You know what I mean? Like when you think of 3, it kind of symbolizes the beginning of the odd, right? The oddities in the world. You know what I mean? The people who aren't really appreciated for what they truly are, or the people who are kind of like outcasted for who they want to be, and things like that. And so whenever you think of 3, you're like, damn, you really are just like an oddball, but we love you for it. You know what I mean? And I think that's just really like a representation of all the characters out there. You know what I mean? Just like not only like you know, fictional, but also like, you know, the characters that you play in your life. You would have to give it up for 3, right? I just want to put that out there, right? 3 should really be 3's in a lot of people's honorable mentions, but I think it should really be in the top. You see what I mean? You see what I mean? Okay, cool. Number 4, right? 4 right here to me represents posture, right? It represents a side of royalty. You know what I mean? Like when you think of royalty, what are the how many people do you think whenever you think royalty, right? You think the king, you think the queen, you think the prince, and you think a princess, right? How many characters is that? 4, right? When you think of a let's go for like story's sake, right? When you think of the main characters of a party group, how many characters are there normally in that party group? Like let's say like D&D or something like that. Typically, exactly. So like just thinking about it, like 4 is a really good set, right? You have like a friend group of 4. You have 4 things you want to complete off a list, right? You can think of your favorite 4 things, right? It's so easy to get to 4 things that quick because 4 is kind of like that. It's kind of like the middle ground. You know what I mean? And I know that people say that 5 is the middle ground, but we'll get into that later on. But like 4 really just represents what it's like to be like, I don't want to say a middle child, but like 4 kind of gives off that middle child energy where it's like good, does their own thing, stays out the way, knows who they are, and is just ready to get shit done when shit needs to be done, right? Because if I tell you name your top 5 things right now, right, I guarantee you're gonna get to 4, and then you're gonna get on 5, and you're gonna be like, well, you know, it could be, well, I can't really think of 5, but you know what you can't think of? 4, right? And I think that 5 is very important in that aspect because when you're told to think of 5 things, it really makes you think, right? Go ahead, name your top 5 cereals right now. I'll go ahead. I'll do it first, and then you can do it after, right? For me, number 1, Cinnamon Toast Crunch. After that, but you get the point, right? So like you gotta think of like 5 things, and it's just like I can make a top 5 list, but that's a lot of leeway. You know what I mean? That's a lot of debating that has to go through it. And I just feel like 5 is just a really good, like, it's a good middle point before you have to actually cross into that thinking territory where you're like, well, now I really have to like really think. You know what I mean? It's like a representation of going from your teenage years into adulthood. Not a lot of stress before 5, but then once you get to 5 and on, you kind of gotta start stressing a little bit, right? And then like once you get to the later numbers, we'll get into that. Kind of represents about like, you know, finality and all that, and you're like, well, you know, it starts at 5. If you mess up at 5, what's it gonna look like when you get to 6, 7, 8, 9, 10? You know what I mean? So like 5 is a really good middle point for a lot of people, but like when you really think about it, it begins at 4, and then you start stressing at 5, and then you go later on into life. But that's okay, because with 6, right? 6 is just kind of like an all-around number, right? 6 is like a little scandalous. It's got a bad connotation, of course, with, you know, 3 of them being, you know, notarized with the devil and all that, right? But it's just, you know, when you think about it, 6 is really just 6 is a masterpiece. You know what I mean? 6 is representative of so many things. It's so enticing, you know, and I think that's why it's also really kind of has that connotation with the devil, because the devil tries to entice you. You know what I mean? But not everything that it does is bad for you. 6, I don't know about the devil. That's a different conversation for a different day. But when you think about 6, you're like, well, if Johnny has how many apples? 6. That's the first thing that comes to my mind, right? You try to eat 6, and it's like, yeah, I could definitely eat 6 of those, but should you? You know what I mean? And it's got that. It's like 2, right? It holds that duality, because when you think about it, 6 is like the first real duality of odd numbers, right? Because like I said earlier, when you think of an odd number, you don't think 1. That's just a singularity. But you think odd number, the first number you think of would be 3, right? For most people, of course, unless you're like, one of those oddballs, like 3, of course, but like, one of the odder ones. And then like, what's 3 plus 3? The duality of 3, it's 6. The duality of the oddities is really 6. And I just think that we should really give 6 their flowers, because people don't really understand the layers. Like 6 has a lot of layers. Like, look, you have the top layer, you have the middle layer, right? You can even see that, right? And then you have what's inside. I just think that it's really, it's symbolic for a lot of things, but we're not going to get into that. That'll be too long of a video, right? So when we get to 7, though, 7 to me is the poster child, right? The golden child, right? Everybody wants to hold up to the high standards of 7. 7 is lucky. 7 is beautiful. 7's got a slim, thick curve to it, right? 7 can be straight laced, but it can also bend the rules at times, right? And when you think of 7, you're like, well, I think honestly, you just think of like elegance a little bit. It stands up tall. It has a little bit of its own bravado. It has a little sway when it walks. You know what I mean? Everybody wants to be 7, but can everybody be 7 when it's time to be 7? You know what I mean? Like, so like when you want to be 7, you can't really, you have to really just like break it down. You know what I mean? By like what 7 truly is. And I think 7 has a lot of pressure. I think that little bend, that little sway it has when it walks, it's because it's been beaten up so many times. Nobody really checks up on 7. They just expect it to be good. And for that, 7 has had to really bend and break to the will of other people, but also fortify itself so that way it's not gonna break over. You know what I mean? You don't want 7 to snap, because when 7 snaps, it turns into who knows, But that's why it's got a little bit of bend, because all that pressure is making it crumble. And if I were to relate 7 to a character, right, a fictional character that maybe people can relate to, it'd be Mirabelle's sister. The one that sings "No Pressure," like pressure that'll tick, 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 but it won't let go. Don't want to get copyrighted now. So I'm not gonna sing the rest, but you understand it, right? I feel as though 7 is just symbolic of her nature, right? And I think that's just, I'm gonna leave it there. There's a lot that 7 can really get into. There's a lot of backstory to 7, but we'll leave it at there, and we'll go into 8, right? So when we talk about infinite possibilities, nobody ever brings up 8, and I don't understand that. You know what I mean? Because when you turn 8 to its side, it's literally the infinity symbol, right? And I feel like 8 doesn't really get its flowers, because 8 is the golden child that never could. You know what I mean? Like 7 is the golden child that did everything right and was able to get everybody to appreciate it. But if you think about 8, 8's really like jack of all trades, master at all, but the procrastination got to it. It couldn't turn over on its side when it needed to. It always had to stand up straight and be its own person. And for that, people didn't really appreciate it. You know what I mean? So it's like 8 could have done a lot. 8 still does a lot, but it's more from the shadows when it wants to, and never really conforming to the norms that everybody else is trying to set for 8, right? 8 does what it wants, when it wants, wherever it wants. You know what I mean? Infinitely. But you guys get it. I think we understand it. On to possibly one of the biggest numbers known to man, right? 9 obviously is the older brother of 6, right? They kind of look alike. You can really tell. You can really see it. They both got it from their mom. And I think 9 is just like the older brother that really set everything straight for the lineage of the 6 and 9 family. And like 6 and 9, they really do a lot together. Like if you think about it, they have 6ix9ine, the rapper. They have 69, the position, and they have a whole lot of other things. You know what I mean? Like 6's relationship with 7 was great, but the brotherhood that 6 and 9 share can't really be broken up. You know what I mean? It's almost like they're always on top of each other. You know what I mean? And I feel as though it's like a very strong familial bond when you look at 9, and then it gets even stronger when you realize that 6 and 9 are obviously related, and then it's just their bond is unbreakable. You know what I mean? I think that's just beautiful to really witness. But on to the big one. You know what I mean?